Boker Tov. Today's Daf is Daf Lamed Zayin and קידושין, as we learned for Shalom, for Elazar ben Rumen, and Yosef Shriel ben Chaim Michal. Right from the top of the Daf, the Gemara starts in the second line. My Tli, my Shein Tli. The Mishnah said that mitzvahs that are totally ba'aretz are only knowing in Eretz Yisrael, and she'ein Tli ba'aretz are knowing all over the world. So what do you mean Tli ba'aretz? My Tli, mine, ain't Tli. Ilay Tli, the Sibba Bia. Like the pasuk says so many times, Ki Sabo el Oretz, Ki v'Yachar Hashem Elokecha el Oretz, Asher Nishba Levasecha. When it says that when you come, maybe it means Tlibat means when the pasuk says about this mitzvah, when you come into Eretz Yisrael, that's what we're speaking about. When you come into Eretz Yisrael, though, that's Tliya ba'aretz. It depends on coming into Israel, and those mitzvahs apply only in Eretz Yisrael, and the ones where it doesn't say Ki v'Yacha apply all over the world. Maybe that's what it means. If it says coming into Eretz Yisrael, that's where that mitzvah is described, and that mitzvah is only in Eretz Yisrael. It doesn't say bia means that you have to do it anywhere in the world. The mitzvah applies anywhere. By tefillin or petach hamor, those mitzvahs the sibba bia. By both of those mitzvahs, petach hamor and tefillin, in the parsha of Kadesh, it says there ki v'echa Hashem Elokecha. When you come in there, and obviously we know that. Certainly, the mitzvah of tefillin applies in chutz la'aretz and in Eretz Yisrael and chutz la'aretz, as well as petach hamor. So that can't be the reason. This is what it means, and of course we know this. If it's something that depends on the person, for example, you have to keep this mitzvah. You have to keep milchas nida. You have to keep Shabbos. You have to keep tefillin. That applies. No, I guess both in baris that applies both in Eretz Yisrael and chutz la'aretz. Chovas karka, if it's something that depends on something that grows out of the ground, whether it's Arla or Klayim or Trumas Amaisris or Peah, leaving the corner of the field, Leket Shekem Peah, all things that apply to something that grows out of land, and that's only in Eretz Yisrael. And that's what the Mishnah said, with the exceptions of Arla and Klayim that apply even to Chutzos, even though these things are something that depends on something that grows out of the ground. Obviously, Arla applies to trees, and Klayim refers to Klaya Kerem, basically, this applies to them also. But Klai Kerem, that applies even in chutz la'aretz. Okay, where do we get this idea from? This difference. Okay, you say it's a nice klal. If it says if something it depends on the person observing it, it has nothing to do with the land. Shchita, things that have nothing to do with the land. Stucca, things that have nothing to do with the land itself growing out of the ground. That applies all over the world. And the things that depend on something that grows out of the ground, that's only in Eretz Yisrael. Where do we get that from? Not me. The Tanarbon of the pasuk says in Re'eh, right? Pasuk says in Re'eh, Eila chukim b'mishpatim asher tishmin lasas ba'aretz asher shalom kechonos l'chal v'ishtav kol yom asher atem chayim al adama, and then it says abei ta'aptun. So that's a famous pasuk. We read that before Sheni in Re'eh. So Tanarbon Eila chukim Eila mirashis. Those are the things that are expounded by the Chachamim that are not favorites in the Torah. Those are the regular civil laws that apply, that Bezin applies, that are written in the Torah. Asher Tishmun Zumishra, that's learning. It could be Mishnayos, it could be any learning. Asher Tishmun that you have to learn. Lasos, you learn in order to do. Zumasa, that's fulfilling it, actually doing the actions. Ba'aretz in Eretz Yachol Kol Loyu El. It says Ba'aretz. It says Eila Chukim Mishpatim. Asher Tishmu Lasas Ba'aretz. Maybe all the laws in the Torah, all Torah mitzvahs only apply in Eretz Yisrael. Wherever you live, all the days that you live, people don't only live in Eretz Yisrael. Some people live in Chutz La'aretz. So that indicates wherever you are. So I think all mitzvahs apply both in Eretz Yisrael and Chutz La'aretz. So we have here a limitation. We have an expansion, an inclusion that we're including more. Meaning some mitzvahs apply wherever you are in the world, and then we have a limitation bar. Some mitzvahs are limited to Eretz Yisrael. So how do we know how to apportion certain mitzvahs to Eretz Yisrael only and certain mitzvahs to Chutz La'aretz? So how are we going to determine it? Look what it says right afterwards. The next pasuk says, it says you should destroy all the avodah zaros. Well, look at the characteristics of the tchunot. What are the characteristics of destroying of avodah zarah? Even though there's talking about destroying avodah zarah, but later on It also talks about bamas and things like that, things that you're not allowed to do, and that's a chavas aguf. That it doesn't depend on Eretz Yisrael. I guess bein baras ben chutz applies all over. Of course, chavas aguf. I guess bein baras ben chutz. So in other words, when it talks about wherever you are, wherever you live, wherever you are, and then it's a beit tapinus come, let's destroy all the avodah zarah. So they were talking here about avodah zarah, and avodah zarah is not dependent on the land, and that applies all over. So we learn out from there a klal that if it doesn't depend on the land, that applies all over the world, like Shabbos, like tefillin, like avodah zarah. Those things apply all over the world. Things that are dependent on the land apply only in Eretz Yisrael. As the mission said, chutz min arla metaklayim, except for arla and klayim that apply even in chutz laaretz. As we'll see, arla is lachamash misina, and klayim we'll talk about in more detail. But then the mission said at the top line of this page that we saw yesterday, Rabbi Lezer mer afa chadash. Rabbi Lezer adds on chadash also. So what is Rabbi? So Gemara now he asks, is Rabbi Lezer coming to be mekel or coming to be machmer? Is he arguing lakula or lechumer, or is he arguing to be more stringent? Is he being lenient or stringent? Oh, lechumer polik. Lechumer polik. How would he argue lechumer? Except all and klayim that apply even to chutzos, even those things are, even though they're dependent on the land, they grow out of the ground and they depend on the land, but still you would say, so you would say it only applies in Eretz Yisrael, but Allah Mashiach comes along to say at least for Arla and maybe klayim d'Rabbanan, but they apply in chutz laaretz, the Hilchos HaGemilut, Allah Mashiach, afagav deikol mechavas karka, even though those things depend on the land, therefore they should only apply in Eretz Yisrael. But the Tanna Kama said no, Arla and klayim even apply even in chutz laaretz, aval chadash. Or it's saying but the Tanna Kama says, okay, that applies to Arla and Klayim because that's halacha mashmi Sinai. But chadash, what's halacha of chadash? You can't eat the new grain until after the korban omer is brought on the second day of Pesach, first day of Chalamoid Pesach. Aval chadash ba'aretz ein b'chatzaretz lo. But chadash is not like that. Chadash is only, it's like any other law that depends on the land. It only applies in Eretz Yisrael. My timer, Moshav lach yishu shevishiva mashma. Now listen to this very carefully. Many times the Torah says b'moshvo sechem, right? Or right, use the word b'moshvo sechem when you will live there, when you will dwell there, and you can interpret that in two ways. That's what we're going to be dealing with in the Gemara over here, both on this stuff and on the days. Moshvo sechem can mean wherever you dwell, indicating even chutz laaretz. Or moshav could also mean after you settle the land in Eretz Yisrael. So it could be that. So maybe he says like this. Chadash only applies in Eretz Yisrael, says the Tanna Kama. We're saying now. Why? Because Tanna Kama says only Arla and Klayim are the only two mitzvahs that are totally in the land, towards Ba'aretz, again, in land, not Eretz Yisrael, that apply in Chutz La'aretz, because Lach Mashmi Sinai. But Chadash, the law that you can't eat the new grain until the korban omer is brought on the second day of Pesach, then only applies in Eretz Yisrael. Ba'aretz and Chutz my time. Moshe, when it says over there, Moshvo Seichem, Taviu Lechem Tenufa, right after Lechem. When it talks about the halacha of Chadash, Moshe means La'achi Yerusha Shiva, after you inherit the land and settle it, meaning after you conquer the land. There were 7 years in which they conquered the land and settled the land, 7 and 7, 14 years in which they conquered, 7 years in which they settled it. It only applies then, after the 14 years, meaning when they first came into Eretz Yisrael, they didn't have a rule of Chadash. They could eat it right away. They didn't have to wait for the second day of Pesach. So my time, Moshe V'lach Yerusha V'shiva Mashma. That's how the Tanna Kama interprets the word Moshe. Also, Rabbi Lezer Lemeimer says no Machmer. He says no. Even Chadash applies in Chutz La'aretz. Not only Arla and Klayim. Tanna Kama said Arla and Klayim only, not Chadash. Why? Because Moshe, when it says Moshe V'sechem, it doesn't mean wherever you dwell. It means when you settle the land. Says no. Chadash also applies both in Eretz Yisrael and Chutz. That's my time. Moshe b'chomakum shata yoshvim. He says Moshe means wherever you dwell. Moshe, wherever you dwell in Alaska, you dwell in the South Pole, wherever you dwell, you have to abide by those rules of Chadash also. So according to this, when Rabbi Lezer says in the top line of this page, Tanna Kama said Chutz min ha'arla min ha'klayim applies even to Chutz La'aretz, even though it's mitzvah tliya ba'aretz. Rabbi Lezer Amar afa Chadash. He's saying even Chadash applies in Chutz La'aretz. Why? Because it says Moshe V'sechem means wherever you dwell. Oh, that's one way to learn Rabbi Lezer. Oh, Dilma, the other way around. The opposite. That the Tanna Kama will say what? That Moshe V'sechem means wherever you dwell, and Rabbi Lezer disagrees. Maybe he's arguing and he's more lenient. Tanakama says what? That all laws that are dependent on the land apply in Eretz Yisrael only, except for Arla and Klayim, but Kolshkein Chadosh, and certainly Chadosh applies. Not that you're learning out the Kavachomer from Halach L'Moshe Messina, because we learn many places in Shas. Halach L'Moshe Messina means it's a special halacha the Torah said that Hashem gave us via Moshe, but you can't. There's no svara to it, so you can't say Kavachomer. But he's saying Kolshkein Chadosh, the Moshe of Kol Makom Shata Yoshvim Mashma, meaning Arla and Klayim, we don't know befavorish, but it's Halach L'Moshe Messina. Certainly Chadosh says befavorish. It says Moshe Kol Makom Shata Yoshvim Mashma. So according to this, the Tanakama also says not only Arla and Klayim apply in Chutz La'aretz, but even Chadosh, because it says Moshe. Also, Reb Lezer holds the Moshe means something else. Chadosh only applies in Eretz Yisrael. The Moshe of La'achi Rusha V'Shiva Mashma. Again, he verses again. Does Moshe mean wherever you live, or it means only after you settle the land in Eretz Yisrael? Umay Afa Kamaisa. So when Reb Lezer says on the top line of this page, Reb Lezer Afa Chadosh, he's not going on Arla and Klayim that apply also in Chutz La'aretz. He's going on the Tanakah on the words of mitzvahs of Fli Ba'aretz, Anogas Ela Ba'aretz, only in Eretz Yisrael, including Chadash. Even though it says Moshe doesn't mean wherever you live. It means after you settle the land. So that's our question: is Reb Lezer being Mekel or Machma? Toshma, Dam Rabbi. So Rabbi will bring a proof that Reb Lezer is being Machma. Dam Rabbi, Mantam the Polygal, Reb Lezer. Who argues with Reb Lezer? Rabbi Shmuel, the Tanya Lamdacha. Rabbi Shmuel there is talking about Nesachim, the wine and oil and flour libations that were brought with karbonos. Generally, it's brought with karbonos sibur. But Rabbi Shmuel says that teaches you from there it says kisabo. It talks about Moshe, or rather, it talks about Moshe. We'll see. It says Bia also there. But it talks about Moshe to teach you. Moshe, wherever it says Moshe, Rabbi Shmuel says wherever it says Moshe, it means after you settle it. It doesn't mean wherever you live. It means when you settle the land. There he's talking about Rashi says before the lines get wide. There he learns out. Notice Rashi uses the lashon the last line before the lines get wide. He said b'shchitas kachim. Remember he said many times called svach b'shchitas kachim. Because the low bar kasavel lahativ and sechlam bomas sibur that you have to bring carbon sibur that were that you have to bring nesachim. Low bomas sechlam not nesachim. He learns out of psukim. There he's talking about which carbonas need nesachim. But it says over there, Rabbi Shmuel says in the Gemara Lamed where it says Moshe, it means after Yerusha Yeshiva. Only then would there be a chiyuv to bring the nesachim for bomas sibur. Elatim nesachim bomas sibur below the bomas yachid. The other bomas yachid did not require the nesachim. Dear Rabbi Shmuel. Okay, that's what Rabbi Shmuel said. Oh, we understand. Hare Shabbos and Rosh Shabbos. By Shabbos it also says where it says lo svar weish b'chomosh b'osechem. There's just, and that applies on against ben baratz ben chutz la'aretz. So what do you say? Moshe only means after you settle the land. By Shabbos, it doesn't just mean after you settle the land. It means chutz la'aretz and Eretz Yisrael. Amalei, so he answers some Shabbos mikavachomer. Shabbos is learned out of mikavachomer that it applies in chutz la'aretz as well. Why? Because ma mitzvahs is called ma mitzvahs kalos no against ben baratz because manach easier mitzvahs that are not so stringent that don't have the penalty of death. Apply in Eretz Yisrael. Chutz la'aretz Shabbos chamir. Shabbos, which is one of the most chumrah of mitzvahs that it has a death penalty. Kol shkein certainly applies in chutz la'aretz. Okay, we'll come back into this dialogue in a few minutes. But that's what he answered. But since you see Midam Rabbi Man Tam the Polygon, who argues with Reb Lezer as Rabbi Shmuel, and does Rabbi Shmuel say that Moshe means only after you settle the land in Eretz Yisrael? So obviously Rabbi Lezer says no. Moshe is more stringent and requires. When it says Moshe, it means wherever you settle, wherever you live, even in chutz la'aretz. And therefore, Rabbi Lezer in our mission, when he says Afa Chodesh, he's saying not only Klai Karim and Arla apply in chutz la'aretz, but even Chodesh as well. Why? Because it says Moshe Vosechem, and that applies all over the world. There was a Shmuel, Rabbi Lezer l'chomer sapog. We see that he argues Shmuel. So you see here that Rabbi Lezer, like we interpreted the mission, the simple understanding that he's more machmer. Again, the Tanakama says which mitzvahs that are dependent on the land apply in chutz la'aretz, only Arla and Klayim. Rabbi Lezer says no, even Chadash. Why? Because Moshe Vosechem means wherever you live, even the chutz la'aretz. So now the Gemara says, well, let's go back to Rabbi Shmuel for a second. Rabbi Shmuel say that when it says Moshe, it means after you settle the land. He's talking about Nesachim. After you settle the land, in other words, in Chutz La'aretz, they didn't bring the Sachem on a carbon yachid, and after you settle the land, then you'll bring even on a carbon yachid. So Bishmal, what's he going up in a Sachem? But a Sachem be a Moshe Ksibo. But a Sachem, it doesn't just say Moshe, it says Bia and Moshe. When you come into the land, and then it says Moshe Mosechem. So maybe only there would he say that it applies after you settle the land. Bia Moshe Ksibo, says Rashi, top line in Rashi on the base. Hechi alt mine Moshe below Bia. Dilma, Haibim Farish Bay, Bia Sa'aras, who the low boy, Lemaimer, Komakum Shati Yoshim, of a Moshe below Bia, even Lachafi L'chutz La'aretz. Who says that Moshe, says Rabbi Shmuel says Moshe means after you settle the land. Who says that? Maybe because there it says, when you come into the land and you settle the land, if it's a double thing, you come into the land and you settle it, then it means only Eretz Yisrael. But if it says Moshe alone, maybe it means wherever you live, even in Chutz La'aretz. Be Moshe Ksibu. That's what Rabbi Shmuel means. That's what the Rabbi Shmuel is saying. It only means wherever it says coming into the land and settle the land, then it means only Eretz Yisrael, not Chutz La'aretz. What was the dialogue with Rabbi Kiva? Rabbi Kiva said, Shabbos, Shabbos, that's their Moshe. And what? And it applies in Chutz La'aretz as well. What was the kasha? The Amalei, Shabbos is a Kal V'chomer. Let him say, well, Shabbos is a Kal V'chomer. Namely, I know be a Moshe Kamina. Let Rabbi Shmuel tell Rabbi Kiva in this dialogue. I'm only told, when do I say that it only applies in Eretz Yisrael after you settle the land? If it says Bia and Moshe, when you come into the land and you settle the land, then it means only Eretz Yisrael. But if it only says Moshe, like it says by Shabbos, it doesn't say by Shabbos when you come into the land. I know be a Moshe Kamina. So what kind of kasha from Shabbos? Shabbos only says Moshe. Moshe means all over the world. The answer is that Rabbi Shmuel answered him two answers. Chada ba'od kamer. He was telling them two answers. Chada dana be Moshe Kamina. Number one, someone asked me a kasha from Shabbos because when I say Moshe means Eretz Yisrael only. If you settle that, means only if it says Bia and Moshe. You come into Eretz Yisrael and you settle the land. That means only Eretz Yisrael. But if it says Moshe alone, that means all over the world. But the kamer Rabbi Shabbos shenem of Moshavos. Shabbos is another problem. Shabbos is a Kal V'chomer anyway. Shabbos is Kal V'chomer. My plea, what's the machlokes between Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Kiva? The Kiva Nesachem and Midbar Kamifagi. Did individuals bring Nesachem in the Midbar or not? Rabbi Shmuel said, well, Kiva Nesachem and Midbar. They didn't bring Nesachem in Midbar. So the pasuk is telling you when you come into Eretz Yisrael and you settle the land after 14 years, then we'll talk about individuals bringing Nesachem. Rabbi Shmuel, take a look at Rashi about 5 lines down in the narrow lines. That's by carbon sibu they brought it in the midbar. That's Rabbi Shmuel's sheet. Rabbi Kiva said no, that they brought Nesachem in the midbar anyway. So I needed a pasuk to tell me that they bring Nesachem in the midbar. We don't need a pasuk. Going on in Rashi, Rabbi Kiva said Rabbi Kiva Nesachem liyachim b'midbar mishkaver l'rabim hilkach al karach ila tina Nesachem and bam b'gdola lo itzrach gra. Only for a Bamas Yachid to bring it over there. So Rabbi Kiva says you don't need the pasuk to teach me the Sachem, and therefore it doesn't make sense to say that Bia and Moshe over here is teaching me about when you settle the land, because they were chayiv in that even before. Different interpretation in Bia Moshe that it says by Nesachem. Amar Abaya. So what did we just say? That Rabbi Shmuel, who is really like the Tanakama of our Mishnah, because he says that Chodesh is not brought. There's no mitzvah of Chodesh, meaning the mitzvah that you're not allowed to eat the new crop until the korban was brought on the second day of Pesach. The Tanakhama says that that's Rabbi Shmuel. It doesn't apply in Chutz La'aretz because when it says Bia and Moshe, Bia and Moshe means only in Eretz Yisrael, and Chodesh it says Bia and Moshe, so it only applies in Eretz Yisrael, not in Chutz La'aretz. And Rabbi Lezer says no, it applies even in Chutz La'aretz because Moshe means wherever you live. So now the Gemara says, Rabbi, hi Tana Rabbi Shmuel, Mapik Meidach Tana Shmuel. This Tana Rabbi Shmuel that we just learned, that says, if it says Bia and Moshe, there only does it apply only in Eretz Yisrael. Otherwise it applies everywhere. This he excludes, he differs, Mapik Meidach Shmuel, disagrees with another Tana Rabbi Shmuel. There are two different Tanoim in Rabbi Shmuel. In Rabbi Shmuel's yeshiva learned differently. Tana Rabbi Shmuel, because another Tana from Rabbi Shmuel's yeshiva learned, however, that Emer Bios B'Torah Stam. Since it says Bias and Torah, Stam, many places it says Ki Biacha Hashem Elokechas. We said Ki Savo Ela Oretz, or Ki Savo Ela Oretz. It says Bia. Wherever it says Bia, it says however Emer Bios B'Torah Stam. Upar L'Chasik is Mechad Man Lachiru Shavi Shiva. And in one of them, we'll see one of them he's referring to is Melach. When you come into Eretz Yisrael, right? When you come to land, the Yerishta v'Yeshavtava, you come in and you settle the land, Bia and settling the land. Marta, and you'll say, Asim al Melech, I'd like a king. All the other countries have kings, I'd like a king too. So since it says many places it's Bia, and by one of them it says Lacher Yusha V'Shiva, by king, because by king it says Kisavo and the Yerishta v'Yeshavtava. Afkol Lacher Yusha V'Shiva. So wherever it says Ki, so he learns out a matzah from appointing a king. Just like by king, it's only after you settle the land. The same, it's not as soon as you come to Eretz Yisrael, but only after the 14 years of settling the land. So wherever it says be, it also means after settling the land. That's what Tana Rav Shmuel says. Our Tana just said be and Moshe. The first Tana Rav Shmuel that we're talking about says only if it says be and Moshe does it apply after you settle the land. But this other Tana Rav Shmuel says no. Wherever it says be, it means after you settle the land. Why? Because you learn out from appointing a king. By appointing a king, it says Bia and Yeshiva. So we learn from there. Wherever it says Bia, also it applies. Right? Afkol Acher Yeshiva. Okay, that's the second Tana Rav Shmuel. What is the first Tana Rav Shmuel? Says doesn't agree with that. Idach. No, you can't learn out from appointing a king. Why? Because both by Melech and by Bikurim does it says Bia Kisavo and it says Biyurishta V'Shavtava. And it's Shnei Ksubim teaching me the same idea that only after you settle the land, and that's Shnei Ksubim like we had the other day. You have two psukim teaching me the same thing. If you have one pasuk teaching me something, you can extrapolate from there to other halachas, to other cases. But if you have two psukim teaching me the same thing, obviously the Torah is telling you only these two, no others. So Melech and Bikurim, only there it says what? Yashtav Mishaftam and Bia. There it applies on yourself, but the other ones, if it doesn't say, the first time Rav Shmuel says, if it only says Moshav, it doesn't mean only in Eretz Yisrael. Moshav can also mean wherever you live. But if it says Bia and Moshav, then it applies only in Eretz Yisrael. So only in those cases does it apply, not in other cases. Okay, all right. Ve'idach, right? Because he learns that from Mishum Dahavi Melech and becomes Sheikh Samiyach and becomes Emlan. Ve'idach. What about the second Tana Rav Shmuel? Says no. That's not Sheikh's Mecha. Why? Because you need each one. It's not like you have two psukim teaching the exact same thing, and it wasn't necessary to say both. And since it says both, it's to teach you dafka those two, no others. No, you couldn't learn out one from the other. It's because wouldn't say bikurim haviyamina bikurim the kamasani. Since bikurim you have enough from them by eating them. Since you bring bikurim, you could eat the fruits. Alter, so you should be able to do it right away before you settle the land. Since it's enough. You're getting enough because it becomes a king. If we would only say that by Bikurim you have to wait until you settle the land, I would say a king. You need a king right away. You need him to conquer. You need him to protect, to defend, for offense and defense. You need a king, right? So therefore, maybe La'alter you should be able to get it right away. So therefore, I can't learn out one from the other. If I only say by a king, I would say no. By Bikurim is different. You have anah. You don't have to wait. By a king, maybe you have to wait 14 years, but not for Bikurim. You want to have anah. You need to eat the stuff. And if I only say by Bikurim, I would know king, because maybe a king you should have right away. Kamashman, both of them you have to wait until you settle the land. Okay, Ve'idach. So therefore, I wouldn't know one without the other, and it's not Sheikh Sumban Keachad. Ve'idach. The first time Rishon will say Nichtav Rachmana Melech Lo Bikurim, we could say Melech Hananu Bikurim Anamina. And I would say, Umam Melech, the king, or the Lifbush, a king who conquers the land. Still, you need a king. Still, Lach Yerusha Yeshiva, you have to wait the 14 years. Bikurim, which is not as necessary. You don't need to conquer the land. It's not such an important thing. Lokosh, and certainly you should have to wait the 14 years. And therefore, since you could learn out one from the other, says the Tanakama, therefore it's Shnei Ksubim Ba'an Kechad, because I don't need to say both. Since you say both, it's two psukim teaching me that it only applies in these cases, no others. The Idach. What about the second Tana? You'll say because of Hachi Havimina Midav Yachalot. I would say no. What do you tell me? If we would only say king, by a king, you have to wait 14 years. Certainly, probably Purim. No, I would look at Chala. Chala is a special mitzvah. Chala, be mafresh Chala. It says there Bevoachem El Eretz Yisrael. Right? It says Bevoachem. Right. But it says it's Bevoachem, which teaches everybody agrees there that since it doesn't say Kisabo or Kisavo, or Kiv Yacha, but it says Beboachem, that means as soon as you come to Eretz Yisrael, Chala applies. So I might think that Bikum should be like Chala. It should apply right away. So therefore, both of them are necessary, right? Because of therefore both are necessary, and therefore it's not Sheikh Sum Echad, and therefore you can learn from the other. That would be the second time. It says the Kamashman that we don't say that. They used to by Chala. Chala applies as soon as they came into Eretz Yisrael, but Bikurim and Melech and certainly a Chadash only applies only after the 14 years. Okay, so what is our general category that the Mishnah taught us? Anything which is a chovas guf that you have to do with your body, go to the mikveh, eat kosher, shchita, Shabbos, tefillin, all those things that apply, that have nothing to do with the land, something growing out of the land, that applies in both in Eretz Yisrael and basically Chutz La'aretz. So therefore, if that's the case, Moshe goes to Shabbos Lamli. What does it say? Lo svaresh b'chol Moshe V'osechem. What does that say that for? Right? Moshe V'osechem is teaching me what? I don't need Moshe V'osechem to teach me. Oh, Moshe, wherever you live. What do you mean wherever you live? It's not dependent on the land. It's not dependent on the land. Once we have the general category that we saw from Abed to Abdun, that wherever it's something, it's not dependent on the land. It applies wherever you live. So why does it have to say Shabbos? Why does it say Moshe V'osechem wherever you live? It's not dependent on the land. So certainly Shabbos should be observed wherever you live. Moshe goes, I might think all binyana demoriskim. It says it in the parsha of other holidays, which we're dealing with right now. We're in the middle of the says Yom Tshuva and the holidays, Sukkot, everything coming up. So since it says it in the topic of Moedos, Tiboy Kiddush Kimonos, you would need the Kiddush of Bezdin. And Bezdin is only in Yehuda. That's where the Bezdin sits. So I might think you need that too. Shabbos should only be observed what? If you're Makadosh it, like Makadosh Chodesh, Bezdin Makadosh Chodesh. How do we know when the holidays are? Sukkot, Pesach, Shavuos, etc. Rosh Hashanah, based on Bezdin being Makadosh Chodesh. So I might think Shabbos depends on that too. Kamash will no. Shabbos is a general, universal idea. It's one of the great miracles of the world that we live in. Hashem gave us that there's never been there's always been the Goyim always tried to destroy our calendar because we know Jews live by the calendar. The holidays, counting days of Nida, whatever it is, we have to live by. Without a calendar, we can't be Jewish. So they always try to destroy the calendar. But the great miracle was that they never fooled with Shabbos. Nobody ever disagreed when Shabbos is every Saturday. There's no just a Shabbos should be. When the various kings changed the calendar, right? They knocked off a few months. The Gregorian calendar, this calendar, the Julian calendar. They change things around for their own benefit or for whatever, but Shabbos was never fooled with, right? So that's the mitzvah that Shabbos does not depend on in fact, how do we call that in the Gemara? How does the Gemara call Saturday? Shabbos Debracious. It's the original Shabbos, right? The original Shabbos has never been fooled with, never been tampered with, never been a fight about that, or is there 2 days of Shabbos? Is there 1 day of Shabbos? Shabbos is always Shabbos, right? So it's Kamash one Moshe, right? So therefore, that's why it says Moshe V'osechem to teach me. It's not dependent on a bezdin like other holidays. Moshe goes dam. There it also says like chelav and dam, the issur of eating the fat parts of an animal, of a behema, and the dam. Why does it say Moshe V'osechem? That's not dependent on the land. Since it says that in the parsha of Karbonos, when Karbonos apply, when there's a base of Mikdash, Nitzur Chelav Dam, then Chelav Dam should be usher, should be forbidden. This man delek carbon, when there's no carbon like this man is there low. Maybe there's no issue of eating Chelav and Dam today because there's no Karbonos anyway. Mashma Moshe, Kamashman that says Moshe there that the Moshe tells me says Chukas Om Dav Sechem B'chol Moshe V'osechem teaches me it applies for all time in all places.
Dam is much earlier. I mean, you have Dam.
Right, but it says also, right, it says Dam, but it also says Dam by Karbonos. So I might think it all applies. Originally, maybe it was Usher, but later on became Usher. It only remained Usher as long as it was as long as there's Karbonos were brought. Moshe the Kasar Chamana Gavi Matzah Moral. I mean, why does it say Moshe there? There it also says B'chomosh V'osechem Yochlu Matzos. Right, so what does it say there for? It's not dependent on the land. It's for Solomon. The says since this is al matzah samor merchlu. This man dika pesach aim this man like a pesach lo. It says al matzah merchlu, right? So you eat the carbon with the matzah mor only when it only applies when there's a Pesach. It doesn't apply when there's no Pesach. Kamash Malon, that what we don't say that, and we eat matzah all the time. The truth is that before Shem say that it says over here matzah or mar lomali. I might think it depends on the carbon come out, not, but mar does depend on the carbon, right? Matzah doesn't depend on the carbon, right? We might think that matzah depends on the carbon. There's no carbon today. We don't bring the carbon. Maybe you shouldn't eat matzah. But the truth is that mar we don't eat today, Menat Torah, right? Because it depends on the carbon. The mar that we have today is only Rabbanan. On the Leil Seder, we have two mitzvahs. Mitzvah of Agara, right? The mitzvah of secrecy of Mitzrayim, and the mitzvah of matzah. The mitzvah of the four coasts is Rabbanan. They think that's the most important thing. It's a Rabbanan. And mar is only Rabbanan. It's only the Raisa with the mitzvah. So the mar here is mentioned as sort of mutar. It's lav dafka. What about by tefillin? We mentioned that before. It says, right? It says in the parsha of Petach Mar, says the Kaddish Nikah before. It says when you come into Eretz Yisrael, put on tefillin. What does that have to do with the tefillin? Is not dependent on the land. Petach Mar Lamali. And we boil it at Tamishmal for another drasha of Tamishmal. Apparently, there were a lot of tons of Rebbe Shmuels. Same mitzvah. If you do this mitzvah, you'll be zochah to come into Eretz Yisrael. That's what it means. Not that it depends on Eretz Yisrael. Obviously, we keep these mitzvahs wherever you are. Okay, so we have this basic machlokas. Does Moshe mean wherever you live, or does Moshe mean after you settle the land? And even there, we had a machlokas on Rav Shmuel or not. Does it have to say bia with the Moshe? First time Rav Shmuel says yes, bia and Moshe means only when you settle the land. Otherwise, Moshe means wherever you live. So they all agree that Moshe can mean that. The other time Rav Shmuel says no. Wherever it says be alone, since in one place it says be in motion, wherever it says be alone, it also applies only in Eretz Yisrael after you settle the land. So now the Gemara says what? If you understand Bishloma, Lamandam, 3 lines from the bottom of the page, on the base or Lamazan base. Bishloma Moshe, if you understand motion means wherever you live. It says in the beginning of Yeshua, by Yochlu, when they came into Yisrael, they ate from the produce of the land, the day after Pesach. They didn't wait 14 years. As soon as they came into the land, they kept the mitzvah of Chadash, right? They only ate after they came into. We'll see. They came into Eretz Yisrael before Pesach, right? But we'll see tomorrow. We'll talk about the calendar tomorrow's daf when they actually came in. They came in a few days before. But they didn't eat from the produce of the land until the day after Pesach, meaning they kept the mitzvah of Chodesh, not to eat the new produce until the day after Pesach, until the day after the second day of Pesach, when the carbon omer would have been brought. So I understand that because it says if you say meaning Moshe doesn't mean after you settle the land; it means wherever you are. So they had to keep the mitzvah of Chodesh wherever they were, right? They ate from the produce of the land on the second day of Pesach. Alma, Akruvoma, they bring the carbon omer, bring the carbon omer, or when the omer would have been brought. Today we don't bring the omer, but that's the day that the omer would be brought, then we can eat from the Chodesh. Elaman omer lachi yerush b'yeshiva. But if you hold what? If you hold that the mitzvah of Chodesh only applies after you settle the land, that means it didn't apply in the midbar. It didn't apply when they first came into Israel. It only applied after 14 years, right? If that's what you're saying, the Chodesh applies as only after 14 years. That's what he darshans. Reb Lezer says Afa Chodesh, right? Because Reb Lezer says Chodesh means wherever you live, right? But if you learn like the Tanakhama, the Chodesh means only after you settle the land. That means there's no mitzvah of Chodesh after you settle, when you first came into Eretz Yisrael for the first 14 years. Alamanda Malachi Yeshiva Shiva Nechalalter. Why couldn't they eat right away? Why did it say when they came into Eretz Yisrael they ate from the new grain when? On the second day of Pesach, not before. Why? There was no mitzvah of Chodesh until they settled the land. If you hold that Moshe means after you come in and settle the land, the answer is they could have, but they didn't need to because they still had plenty of food. They opened their backpacks and they still had the man. They ate the man for 40 years until they came to inhabited land. Until they came to the edge of Eretz Canaan. So the way Rashi and Tosfos is the other way around, but Rashi learns that El Eretz Shabbos means Eretz Yisrael. They came into the land that they inhabited, and then it says they ate it until they came to the edge of Eretz Canaan before they came in. So the two verses seem to be in contradiction. Ef Shalom or Ad Boam El Eretz. Can't say that they ate them all the way till they came into into the inhabited land, they ate it only till the edge. You can't say it means until the edge of Eretz Canaan. Okay, so what does that mean? The Shiva Ba'adar makes Moshe. Moshe died, we know, on Zayin Ba'adar was his yard, so that's when he died. As soon as he died, the man stopped raining down on them. Even though it was once they weren't supposed to keep, on Friday they got for Shabbos, they're not supposed to keep it overnight, etc. But here, when it stopped coming, they saved what they had. They were supplied from the mun that they had in their vessels and their backpacks, whatever, ad Shishasa b'Nisan, until the 16th of Nisan. So that means over here, meaning the mun really stopped when they came before they came into Eretz Yisrael at the edge, where Moshe died. The mun then they ate from the mun continued coming until Moshe died, and he died in Chutz La'aretz before they came in, right? Then that was on Zayin Ba'adar, and then they still had mun left over in their backpacks. They kept that; it stopped coming down, but they ate that until the 16th of Pesach, when they were already in Eretz Yisrael, and then they were able to eat from the new one. So if you hold that the mitzvah of Chadash applied after they settled the land, that means it didn't apply at this point. So why didn't they eat from the new process? Because they still had plenty of mun. Mun tasted better, right? The mun tasted whatever you wanted it to taste like. So they ate from that. If you hold that the mitzvah of Chadash applies anywhere, meaning Moshe means anywhere, it doesn't mean when you settle the land, then that means it applied even in the Midbar, and it applied when they came into Yisrael. So that means that they didn't eat from the new grain because they were keeping the mitzvah of Chodesh. So you could learn either way. All right, we'll pick it up from here tomorrow. Continuation of this discussion about when they came into Eretz Yisrael. Have a good day.